All right, hello drama class. This is the long anticipated monologue video. I'm going to walk you through every step of the monologue project, which is going to serve as your final exam grade for drama class. Before you begin this assignment, you should have two things done. One, you should have an account made on playscripts.com, and two, you should find a monologue within one of those scripts. The first thing I want you to do is you need to understand what a monologue is. So a monologue is when you have one person talking for an extended period of time on stage. Usually that person is explaining their reasons or their motivations for doing something. I'm going to show you a quick example of a monologue. I'm going to pause the video. Okay, so what I have here at the top of my screen is a monologue from the character George in the play Of Mice and Men. Now, Of Mice and Men is also a movie, but I want us to specifically pick plays. All right, that's why we have the Play Scripts account. So you can see that this is about 5 to 6 lines of dialogue, and if I were to read this out loud, it would probably take somewhere between 30 and 60 seconds. This is the perfect length that we're looking for. If it's shorter than this, it might be a little too short. If it gets much longer than this, it's really hard to break down, and it makes a lot of work for us for this project. Now, I'm going to teach you a couple of important terms for you to know, and those are going to be in the Monologue Packet, which is the assignment attached to the place where you found this video. The Monologue Packet looks like this. The first page is a couple of different terms that I'm going to go through with you somewhat quickly because these videos are limited for time. The first term to know is the magic if. This, as you can read, is a technique used to get actors to open up their imaginations. It is simply asking, what if I was this character? What if I was George? What am I feeling? What do I want to happen? What has brought me to this point? Asking yourself these questions helps you get an understanding of what that character's feeling. And if you know what they're feeling, you can more accurately pretend to be them on stage. Now, when you are pretending to be a character on stage, we often practice many, many times, and sometimes that can lead to us sounding very robotic or over-rehearsed. This is where we come in with this term, the illusion of the first time. Now, the illusion of the first time is the idea that when you are up there on stage performing in front of an audience, the audience should understand that this is the first time this has ever happened for this character. All right? So if you are in a play where there is a murder scene and you're playing the murderer, every time that murder happens on stage, it should seem like it was the first time. And otherwise, it'll just be a boring, okay, I stab you and you're on the ground, okay, and we're moving on. All right, so that's kind of the illusion of the first time. You don't want to appear over-rehearsed. All right, I'm going to scroll down a little bit. Okay, moving on. Any character who's delivering a monologue usually has some sort of obstacle. All right, we know that an obstacle is something that gets in our way. This can be a physical thing, like a rock in the middle of the road, or it could be a person. Maybe my goal in the scene is to skip class, and my obstacle is the teacher coming down the hall, right? So I have to figure out in character what is the excuse that I'm giving to that teacher to be out of class. Now, with the next thing, we have subtext. So subtext is when you say one thing, but you kind of mean another thing. The classic example that I use here, let's say a student were to walk through my door right now, and I say, "Oh, John, it's so good to see you," versus, "Oh, John, it's so good to see you." Those are two very different ways to say the exact same words. The subtext of the first one is that I am excited. The subtext of the second one is I'm being sarcastic. I'm not that excited to see you. All right? So it's the thing that's being said underneath. A lot of the times that is influenced by the tone or the speed with which someone says the line. The next thing we're going to learn is tactic. So some of you may have played tactical games or tactical video games. This is another way of thinking of the word strategy. All right, so let's go back to the example of trying to skip class. I see the teacher coming down the hall. Maybe my tactic is to try and lie and convince the teacher that I'm actually on an assignment for another teacher. All right, so my tactic is to trick them. Or maybe it's a teacher that I know and I'm really good in their class, so I'm just going to try and be nice to them and make them not even think twice about the fact that I'm skipping class. So maybe my tactic is to flatter them. Oh, Mr. Schaefer, I see you got new glasses. That's a really nice haircut you got, right? If you're flattering them, they don't think to question you. So that could be a tactic as well. Basically just means strategy, how the character wants to achieve their goals or how they're going to overcome their obstacles. Tempo is a fairly straightforward word. It is simply the speed at which you are talking. As I said earlier, the speed, the volume, and the tone of your voice can change the way that people hear your words. The last thing at the bottom is an example of W questions. These are the questions that we have learned about ever since elementary school. Who, what, where, when, why, and how, right? Ask yourself these questions to get into character, to help you understand who is this character. And there's a large list of questions here. Okay, now that you have an idea of what a monologue is, I want you to go to YouTube. I want you to type in Syndrome Monologue. This is from the movie The Incredibles. All right, the video is right here at the top. Some of you, I'm sure many of you have seen this movie. I want you to click this video and watch Syndrome's monologue. All right, I'll give you a moment. Pause me. Watch this. Okay?
And when I unleash it, I'll get... You sly dog. You got me monologuing. I can't believe it. It's cool, huh? 0 point energy. Yeah, I save the best inventions for myself.
All right, so Syndrome even uses the word monologuing. You got me monologuing. So throughout this scene, I want you to think about what is Syndrome's goal? What does he want? And then what is his obstacle? What is in his way of getting what he wants? And then you look at his tactics. So how is he trying to overcome the obstacle? What is the strategy he's using here? And then his expectations. What does he expect to happen at the end of this? All right. Now, with those 4 things that I just mentioned, we actually have an acronym here. We have a GOAT, G-O-T-E. Goals, obstacles, tactics, expectations. These 4 things are important to understanding before you try to figure out what your character's monologue would sound like. However, it is important. You're going to need to read the monologue a couple times to figure out the answer to those things. There are no right or wrong questions when it comes to figuring out what your GOAT is. Each character can be interpreted differently by different people. If you remember back to our first assignments of the year, the audience and the performer have a special relationship because no 2 audiences are ever the same. So the performer's show is always going to be viewed differently, night after night after night. Now, for those of you following along on the worksheet in the monologue packet, I want you to scroll down to the second page. Right now, it looks like this. It's sideways. If I go up to view and I go to rotate view, I'm going to hit it clockwise once. Now it's a lot easier for me to read. Go through this and start to think about these questions regarding Syndrome's monologue. I'm going to have you go back to YouTube in a minute and watch a second monologue to think about these questions. Okay, this next example of a monologue is from the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, the 3rd one. I want you to, on YouTube, search for Elizabeth Speech Pirates. Either one of these videos will work. And you're going to watch this woman stand up and give an inspiring speech to a bunch of pirates before they go into a battle. Pause me, watch this. Think about the questions on your worksheet while you're watching it, okay? All right, so now that we've finished watching Elizabeth's monologue, we can answer these questions. Who is our person? Elizabeth. Elizabeth Swan, if you know the story. What does your person think about themselves? Well, based off of the speech that we just witnessed, she certainly thinks that she is a capable leader. I would think that she probably thinks of herself as a bit brave as she gets up to try and inspire everyone. And she probably thinks of herself as the only person who can do this. She looks around her and everyone else seems to be pretty at a loss for hope. The one pirate, Captain Barbossa, says it's a fool's chance or that they don't stand a chance. So she gets up and that's her motivation to begin this speech. What do other people think about this character? Again, this can be anything that you can think of. One thing that we discussed in class was how Elizabeth is the only woman on this pirate ship. So do the other pirates see that? Or at this part in the movie franchise, have they come to accept her as one of them and they don't really pay much mind to her gender, right? Maybe others, like her husband there is Will. Will is there as well, the character played by Orlando Bloom. I'm sure he's thinking about her. Wow, this is my beautiful wife who's out there kicking butt and taking names, right? So what has happened prior to this monologue? Now, in these examples, it's hard for us to know unless we've seen these movies. But in our scripts, when we're reading and finding a monologue, that's what the actor does. The actor's going to do some research to figure those out and figure out what came before this. What are the dominoes that have fallen up to this point to lead us to this speech? And then you can go on and continue answering some of these questions. Should you find any of these questions too difficult, please do send me an email and I can try to explain them more directly. All right, I'm short for time, so I'm going to go quickly. This one right here is a monologue, like I said, that I found from George in Of Mice and Men. What I've done here is I've begun to start marking it up. Now, I would always do this by hand. However, in the age of 2020, I've tried to figure out ways to do this on a computer. You may see that I occasionally put these large bolded slashes in the middle of some of my lines. What these slashes do are they show me where the character is changing tactics. Now I'm going to read the first two lines here so that we can see what the difference is. So for those of you who don't know, George is traveling with a guy named Lenny. Lenny's not very bright, and Lenny's always getting George into trouble. George gets mad and says, "When I think of the swell time I could have without you, I go nuts. I never get any peace. If I was alone, I could live so easy. I could get a job and work no trouble. And when the end of the month come, I could take my $50. I could go into town, get whatever I want. I could stay in a cat house all night. And what do I got? I got you." Now, I'm out of character now. So whenever I hit one of these lines, I know that I kind of change tactics. So I understand when I'm going to change them and what tactics I'm going to use. I'm going to go ahead and fill out my goat. So, my goals for this scene, George is planning on venting his frustrations. He wants Lenny to understand his frustration, and he wants Lenny ultimately to leave him alone. No problem. His obstacles, Lenny's not very smart, and he's going to have a hard time changing his behavior. That's going to change the way that George goes about this. He's not going to sit down and try and reason with him. Be like, "Look, man, don't you understand what's wrong here?" No. He knows, and he's also very tired after a long day of walking. That is what happened before this scene. They've been walking down a dirt road. So what are his tactics? He tries to guilt Lenny. He also tries to justify his anger by listing all of the things that Lenny does wrong. He also begins to rant until he furiously explodes, calling Lenny a mean name. Now notice I've used words like guilt, justifies, exasperated, or desperate. Furiously angry. Now, if you're looking for good words to use here to help you show a really good, visible emotion, I want you to go back to the monologue packet. Now, we've rotated it, if you were following along earlier. So to fix that, remember, go to View, rotate View, and this time I'm going to hit counterclockwise. These are a complete list of very good, seeable verbs. If I'm sitting here right now doing this on stage, what am I doing? You can't tell because it's not very visible. But if I ask my student, "What are you doing?" I'm thinking. My character's thinking. Okay, well, thinking isn't visible. Maybe he's contemplating, right? Or any other variation. Take a list through these words. These are examples of great words to use to describe your tactics. The page below, these are bad words. These are either very vague or not very visible, okay? Or they're just a little bit too fancy. So at the end of the day, once you've found your monologue, I would like you to get it typed up in some sort of format like this. If that's not doable, please take a picture of it or print it out so that you can work on it by hand. And I want you to figure out in that monologue that you selected, what is your character's GOAT? What is their goals? What is their obstacle to achieving those goals? What are their tactics to overcome those obstacles? And what do they expect to happen? George expects that Lenny will be sad and apologize, and then he will leave him alone and get some peace and quiet. Does that actually happen? Well, you'll have to watch the play of Mice and Men to find out. That's all my time for now on this 15-minute video. Please email me if you are struggling with this. I know that drama is difficult online, but this should be a fun assignment. Find something interesting that interests you, and have a wonderful day.